I want to say this, just one thing as a thought. Unless somebody else has got what they want to take over. So here's my thought for the day, and that is scouting is a goner in 2 months. Personal progress is over. So what's coming up? Do you know what to anticipate? Because the fact is, so look at this room, I expect many of you in here, if not all of you, to be heavily involved with youth in your near futures. So do you know what the future of the LDS program is for this?
Find out in a couple weeks.
Yeah, well, they're starting to announce now. Word's getting out. It's kind of being rolled out as we're talking about right now. So I think it's going to be mostly about goal-based stuff. You set goals for yourself, and for yourself for these youth. They'll work on personal goals and development, and then as leaders, you help them accomplish this and fulfill that. And why are we doing this? Why are we changing this up? Because there's a prophet who guides this church and this university. He's the boss of this university, he's the prophet, I think. At least the board directors up in Salt Lake. And my interpretation is today, he's going to be here. And he's going to speak as a prophet today to you guys. And I think that is remarkable. And it is so exciting. Melissa said the place is already slammed. I was talking to Carolyn Vermeulen this morning. She said that she's off right now to go to Mary's because there's a whole line of people outside the building. It's like a standing line that goes all the way down the sidewalk. It's mostly people who are not from BYU. That's how they're wanting to get in. So it's going to be packed. So you, after class, be in line for the Marriott Center, all of you. Or watch it or something. Whatever works best for you. That's going to be slammed over there. And I'm glad it is, right? That there's a reason it's going to be slammed. People appreciate those words. But anyway, get ready for these changes coming up soon. It's all based on a prophet's decision. I think it's fantastic. It's so good to have this. On Thursday, we're going to have a discussion here about drones and talk about how drones are applied in our field. And then Thursday afternoon, we've got clearance from the FAA to go. Ryan's going to start telling you about the process of being able to fly a drone. It's not, you can go and buzz one around for fun, but if you're going to do research with it, you need to come and listen on Thursday about what you have to do. Because it's not, you don't just go grab a drone and go fly it. We've done that in the past. I've got some projects we've done that, but we're going away from there. It's not the way to do it. So Thursday you'll hear some about this. That's a drone picture right there. Do you know what you're looking at? Yes?
Does that make an image of that?
Yeah, but you can't say. What is that? We saw. I showed this last time. What's the resolution of this image, James? And we'll have a whole discussion about remote sensing. I'm just talking about patterns and processes today. But it leads to, we use these tools to detect those patterns. Here's some bare ground. There's some cover. And can you quantify this? The answer is you can quantify that. We'll use some classification techniques. We can come here on, not Thursday's lab, but a week from, we'll start to classify images. And you'll be able to pull apart these different criteria. And you'll have to do this. That's going to be part of your assignment. So pull it apart and then evaluate how well you're able to do that. So that you can take your drone out, go do this, and be done. But there's also the process that goes into this. It's not, this is one image, but if you're going to take a whole series of images, you have to go through a process to stitch them together so you have one great big photograph. And we'll get that later, and then you can speak on behalf of that as well. Any guesses on resolution? What is a pixel size? Resolution being the detail of it, right? How well you can discern different objects across a image like that, a picture. So if these are, you know what kind of plants those are? Take a guess. Nick, let's have you take a guess. What's the purple one? What'd you say? Do you say it, Daniel? You got it?
Yeah.
What'd you say? Lupinus caudatus. Lupinus caudatus in purple. So if you know those are individual inflorescences, you can see what happens when you get to the outside, right? Here's, looks like they're poking them this way. If you come over here, they look like they're poking out this way a little bit. And right in the middle is called nadir, N-A-D-I-R. That's smack dab in the middle. When you get high resolution like this, it really starts to emphasize what happens when you get away from nadir based on that oblique perspective of an image. So if that's a lupin like that big or so, what's the resolution? How big are those pixels? And can you discern characteristics of those plants? I can tell you exactly, I can probably count the number of inflorescences that are produced by a single lupin and be within probably one or two of reality. But then over and over, I can probably estimate exactly how many lupin flowers are being generated, which you could translate to seed production. You can translate it like Nick does to, not pollen, but nectar production. Nick, how big's a pixel?
Really small. I don't know exactly.
Millimeters, right? We're in the millimeter range. So centimeter here, we're down to half a centimeter or less. 4, 5, 6 millimeters. And you can see individual blades of grass or whatever plants you got scattered across. It's just a really cool tool. So here's some analysis of taking images like that. You develop these comparisons. Here's a sagebrush grassland in southeastern Oregon, which I did way back. And 10 by 10 meter plot, if you've got the right kind of resolution of data, you can start to pull apart the different attributes and characteristics. We'll deal more with that later. I've got a bunch of stuff on remote sensing that will emphasize what you're measuring and how you discern those things. So resolution, separation of components, the smallest interval measured by a scientific instrument. Several ways of thinking about this. The smallest feature that can be mapped or sampled, and the space between display elements. And it leads to this discussion of scale. So that right there, millimeter resolution, but do you always want millimeter resolution? Does it matter, Nick, that you have millimeter resolution on that image?
Depends on what you're looking at.
So what are you looking at?
I'm trying to calculate the total cover, so yeah, it needs to be like at least as small as the object that you're looking at. So some of the flowers are really tiny, so if I have smaller resolution, then this kind of makes a mixel. And kind of blends.
Yeah.
surrounding things.
Does it ever get to where it's not beneficial? Where can you think of examples of where way too high resolution might not actually benefit you? Or be a detriment?
If you're looking at a big area, it would take a lot of computing power.
That is one thing, right? So there's an area we were sampling at, I think it was either David Birchfield or Ryan's project. It was Ryan. We went over to Ryan Jensen, he's our supercomputer, to do a larger area of sagebrush. We were doing sagebrush analysis stuff. And so many photographs in one area that it took all day and into the next day. It was like 40 hours or something like that to process these tile segments and stitch them together. Hours and hours. Then you want to start to work on this, and you're going to have just a lot of information you have to do.
I think I would see ran into that with the Fox stuff. Try to do like a habitat thing for the whole state, and some of our layers, it was just too much data, and it wouldn't run it because it was too large, or it was going to take like days to run it or something. She's decided to make her study area smaller.
Yeah. One of my very first master's students did that same thing. Was going to do a whole state assessing habitat for a particular shrub, and ended up being just Tooele County after about half a year of just trying to get this thing to work. It just was not going to happen. It was just too much information. But based on your question, maybe that's not necessary. So you have to really think that pretty carefully. Scale something really to think, to put a lot of time in consideration as to what do you want to know and how much information do you really need to get out of that. Ranging all the way from biosphere clear down to cellular structure. The grain, it's the same concept as we use that word almost interchangeably with resolution. But considering the scale itself, defined by the prominent consideration, base layers are often obtained from remotely sensed data, and the grain of imagery is dependent on the source and is becoming smaller and smaller as sensors are developed. So here are some examples. We'll talk about these later as well, but Meteosat, 10 kilometers. AVHRR has been around for a long time. It's 1 kilometer data. And it's funny that you call it advanced, very high resolution. radiometer, because it seems like that's not it's very coarse is what that is. You would use this for large regional areas, entire United States. Landsat, MSS, and later TM, these are multispectral sensors. And 30 meter pixel size is typical for this one, 28 or so, but usually closer to 30. And then spot, there's a whole number of these that goes down into higher, finer resolution as you go. Where you have high aerial photography, 1 meter, low aerial photography, 0.1 meter, ultralight, small format, 0.1 platforms, drones. There's all kinds of stuff you can use. And, you know, which sensor you pick and the way you approach this will depend on the very questions you're asking. So sometimes a drone might be the right thing, and sometimes it's not. And I'm having a debate right now. We might be getting some funding for a study in Hawaii, looking at certain forest types. And I've got my drones. I could haul them over there. We could go fly transects over these plots and characterize this forest growth characteristic. But I'm not sure that's even necessary or even the best thing to do. If for a scientific question, it might be interesting. But if I really want to know, if I want to map the distribution of this forest, and I'm sitting with my drone going back and forth, I could eat up a ton of time. I'm not sure I'm going to get that much more information out of it. So you find a different mechanism. Try something different. So there's a number of attributes we measure to figure out what are most important to an ecosystem. Plant dominance, biomass cover. This is actually #1 graduate student I've ever had back at Oregon State. Kentucky's got a beer. Not that always matters. I've seen some beers around here too. But that guy's totally good dude, totally great guy. And we were out here trying to do the same, assessing sage grouse characteristics. And so we were out here doing plot work, measuring these different variables in the field. And then we had a company come and fly over to our sites to make a correlation between field-based measurements and what we're seeing remotely. And then did some model development, some really cool software to predict and estimate how landscape heterogeneity affects sage grasses. And the right kind of sensor is going to make a big difference in the outcome of your ability to compare field-based information to remote sense image. So thinking that through, wise move. Plant associations or community assemblages, and how those will also interrelate to the type of information you want to get to assess things from the landscape perspective. Here's this term resilience and resistance. I want to make sure everyone's on board with that. There's a whole series of papers that have come out on state transition theory, and the big supporting concepts are resilience and resistance. Do you all feel like that you've got that concept down? So let me give you a quick definition of resistance in your best words.
The ability to fight change.
Okay, so resist or fight it. So what's an example of that in your mind?
It's a good question.
It's always the tough moment, right? We got some examples?
Resisting cheatgrass invasion, native vegetation that's already there.
Okay. So if there's native plants already in place, the opportunity for cheatgrass to come in is hindered, right? You can't even find a place to establish.
So you think this fire in the background, that's obviously like a really big fire. Like a lot of bigger conifer trees, like they're pretty resistant to fire. Like a fire will go through, it will kind of like scorch the outside bark where the tree will still continue living. A lot of the smaller grasses and shrubs totally gone, but a lot of those will bounce quickly back. So the tree is resistant while the things that are bouncing back after the fire are resilient.
Good. Excellent. And then resilience, how does that compare? Same thing or different? We use those words almost together, if they're coupled together. So how does resilience compare to resistance? Really important concept, that you get this difference. Who wants to take a stab at that?
Is following a disturbance the key? Is the ability to come back after there's been a disturbance, or resistance is preventing the change at all? Resilience is coming back after the disturbance.
How does your research ties into this, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How does it fit into this?
How does mine fit
Yeah.
into this?
Yeah.
Well, if there's native vegetation on the ground, you don't get a cheatgrass invasion, and if there's been a fire, If you can get native vegetation back in or perennials back in, you can keep cheatgrass out, but if you don't,
So are the systems you're working in, are they resilient? Would you consider them resilient?
no. They're very dry, so they have a hard time.
So the factors that would affect the ability for that site to recover are not present?
Not often.
Well, not in a way that can actually fulfill this ability to establish native plants. So really, that's exactly it. Really, after this disturbance, to recover back to a point of a desirable system, one that is functional, considering the structure, the processes, the function that structure has on that system and how it relates to the ecological processes. They're all tied into these thoughts of resistance resilience. So processes being movement of water in the ground through infiltration is a process. And the structure of plant communities in a resilient system facilitates that process to happen. If they're all tied together, you maintain this healthy, I guess the word is healthy, but stable system. If they start to decouple over time through disturbance or stress, and they're not resilient to that, then or resistant, you can have a serious long-term effect. Scales I don't want to talk very much about in this slide. Start from many different scales, both spatially and temporally. Choosing appropriate scales is often the most critical decision in a landscape study. Generally, as the size of the area studied increases, internal resolution decreases. It's sort of a trend we see. If you're going to study the entire United States, you're saying you're not going to look at really fine pixel resolution. It's just not. It doesn't seem like it makes sense or appropriate thing to do, considering time and money. Here's some other terms. The proportion of map or model that bears this thing that represents is the ratio between the dimensions of the object that you're considering and the ratio on a map that's equivalent to their surface. Other terms, there's a whole bunch of terms we'll use throughout this class and just in this field of landscape ecology. Configuration, or the arrangement of elements across a surface. The connectivity we discussed a little bit last time. As you think about fragmentation, down here, breaking up of habitat, connectivity is how they are tied up, how they are associated or connected throughout an environment. Cover type and edge. We'll use cover types or feature type a lot. We have different classes we'll create, and what you define those to be, how you measure that is something that we will talk about for the semester. And edge. Heterogeneity, landscape, matrix, patch, scale, are big terms. We'll discuss those a lot. A few more slides on scale. The thought of ecological processes and scale, spatial configuration is linked to ecological processes. So I took this class in Yellowstone out to, and some of you have been there before, to, what was that lake? Gosh, what's that lake? Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, you weren't there. That's true. It is Lake Harlequin. You guys been to Harlequin Lake? So if you go into Madison River along Yellowstone, you turn off, you head up over this little ridge into Harlequin Lake. And it's a good sized, large pond. It's got lily pads out there. And it's all built by beavers who have established. And it's got to be 5 to 10 feet deep of water. There's a whole aquatic system surrounding it. So I asked my class out there, I said, what are these strategies that beavers have to persist and survive year-round in an aquatic and a terrestrial system? We are totally just based on terrestrial, and once in a while we go aquatic and we have to get geared up for it. So what are these? What are the advantages that beavers have, just for the heck of it, that allow them to persist in this aquatic terrestrial system? So the tails act as a rudder. They do. They allow, I don't think they actually propel themselves with it so much, but they will rudder with it. It's also a warning sign. Slap it. It's a warning sign to other beavers. What else do they do? That allow them to do this, and it affects this. Right? This is not a beaver dam, but there's a lot of systems out there that are affected by this. Any other thoughts about what they do? They store fats in the tail, also under the skin as an insulation. What else is there? It's cool stuff. These guys are amazing. Totally adapted to this environment. There's 2 out of about 20 things. They have web feet. True. Web feet.
Like their coat is able to kind of repel water so that they're not just completely subsidized.
Yeah, and actually they have 2 layers of hair. They have an outside layer that they lube up, and it creates a water repellent. You remember what they used to lube it up with? Remember this term? That's a real cast. It's called castoreum. Castoreum they secrete from glands, and they have a hooked toe, a hooked nail, and they get this castoreum oil product on their fingernails, and they'll rub it into their hair. It's that outside layer. And below that is fine hairs and incredibly dense that acts like down in a duck. And it insulates their bodies so they stay warm. In the winter, because they're not going to sleep in the winter, they're staying awake and they go out and swim around sometimes, get in the water. Awesome. Awesome adaptation. What else? 15 minutes, 20 minutes of holding your breath. Big lungs, livers that can deal with buildup of stuff that should be expelled.
They can survive on wood, which is plentiful in that area, so they don't ever, food is pretty plentiful.
Yeah. And how do they survive on wood?
Don't they eat like bark and leaves and
The
stuff?
bark, cambium, the material underneath the bark itself, probably a little bit of bark because on the plant, the kind of tree.
Because they have certain types of bacteria or something.
Yeah, they're like a cow. They're a fermenter. Excellent. Anything else you can think of?
Don't they build their home so that it has aquatic access?
They only can get in and out of their little huts, their lodges, underwater,
Don't they
which
also
is
have
fantastic.
like cute little home with like a wood fireplace and like books on the shelf?
They do. They actually have.
Like
said
it's
that
more
correctly.
I feel like that's the most accurate description.
They do. They produce a mud room. It's a separate room when they come up out of the water where they shake off and they get wet, and then it goes over this little lip into a back room. Like almost all beavers will build this. They have like two separate cavities in their lodges. It's so awesome with books.
Don't their teeth always grow?
They're always growing.
So, wear and tear.
Yep, permanently growing teeth. But what's the other advantage of having teeth the way they do?
Their front layer, their teeth is a lot harder than their back layer, so it's so sharp.
They have hard enamel on the front of it, so when they bite, the backside erodes away faster, so it's self-sharpening. Awesome. Anything else? They have a nictitating membrane over their eyes, so when they can keep their eyes open and just shut that nictitating membrane so they can see underwater while they're swimming around, as if you would have goggles on. It's the same perspective for them. What else? They are delicious. Never have. That's
I should eat the tail. Supposedly Lewis and Clark's and the tail. And the tail is one of my favorite things to try across the West.
Is that right? Where we get the traffic?
It's like a white
Really?
They alter their environment kind of unique so that it suits their needs. Like a lot of other animals, they've changed to live in their environment, but beavers change the environment so they can live it.
Exactly. That is so true. Right before winter, they'll pack the dam and the lodge with wet mud, and their timing has to be just right. So they time it so where weeks, not too far ahead, it's got to be days or weeks before it starts to freeze. They'll go and start lathering those things up, and then freeze kicks in, and it just solidifies the lodge and the dam like a fortress. So in the winter, if there's a grizzly bear coming through, they're not getting in. It's like this big ice block. Totally awesome thing. They do not eat fish, was the report. They will have up to 2 years of young with them in the lodge at any time. And when they disperse, they actually do have a scent because of the castoreum that others will detect, and the more related they are, the more they'll allow or recognize each other. The scent's not very detectable, they will repel it. But it still goes back to mating, because they don't want to interbreed. So there's a lot of careful social interactions if you want with this as well. Anyway, totally impact the environment around them. They will harvest a ton of wood, and they increase water tables. It really affects this. And so you see these patterns that show up they affect these processes, which is really cool. So here's a statement from Turner. Ecological process or energy capture, hydrology, and nutrient cycling alone can generate complex patterns in an otherwise homogeneous landscape. And our goal is to be able to assess those and evaluate what they mean. Here's some names. Here's Gregory Gause in 35 for spatial ecology specifically. The thoughts about what this means. In Struggle for Existence, studied predator-prey relations with paramecium and didinium coexist dependent on periodic reinvasion of a subdivided habitat. So early on in a magnifying lens, they were understanding that it's not just a simple relationship between these two. There's a spatial component that goes into this as well. Carl Troll, German biogeographer who coined the term landscape ecology. So that thought of what this is not something that just happened in the 90s or 2000s. This idea of landscape analysis has been around for a long time. And Huffaker investigated phytophagous mites and their predators. He observed distinctive patterns linked by dispersal rates. And then there's this guy. Do you all know this picture of who that is? This is an ecological thing for you to think about. This is Robert Whitaker right here. No, that is Whitaker. In 56, he performed fundamental research on spatial gradients. The whole idea of doing like ordination, even regression to some extent, but really the idea of ordination and how things are associated with each other across gradients was this guy's thing, because he did not see everything as discrete. There's discrete analysis where you're comparing, in our research we do a real specific study looking at this treatment versus no treatment. That's a discrete analysis. But many times things across the environment are not discrete. You might want to investigate what that means, and so they develop these statistical measures for assessing that. He was one of the very first to have done that. In 67, MacArthur Wilson came up with that theory of island biogeography, which is this: the larger the landmass is for a particular island, in this case, number of species or species richness increases with that in a very linear. If you think of the R-squared value on that, that is tight. So the size of patches becomes really important to the ecological response you expect to see in that site. Okay, so effects are patch size on linking corridors and how that then influences the distribution of species. So today we have all these advances. We got great tools for doing this. You're going to learn a whole bunch from this class, all with the ability to assess these different patterns and patches at different scales and interpret what that means. Make some sense out of that. We've already done this. The scale from individual to arrangement of communities. Here's these. You'll see these on maps. These units like this, 1 to 24,000. That is a typical scale ratio that you'll see on 7.5-minute topographic maps when we download information from AGRC, which I'll show you later on in a couple labs. We can get into more of this as we go, but the idea is you have to recognize what these things mean. And the map you're looking at will vary tremendously based on these numbers. So that right there means that 1 unit for an object in real life is 24,000 of those. I'm sorry. That on a map is 24,000 of these in real life out in the field. So 1 inch, 1 centimeter, whatever, is 24,000 in the field. So here is a comparison just for the terminology of grain versus extent. Extent has to do, you can hold your resolution consistent or constant. It's the number of pixels and how the pixel size is not going to change at all. But the area that you're covering, that is called extent. Whereas grain, here are these patterns you're seeing right here, this kind of detailed dark and lights. There's the same representation in a much coarser situation. And back to the question we were doing, I'll show you, I think, some slides later on. We were doing some work with willow. And the question was, how accurately can we classify willow across this entire watershed? And one thought was, we have really high resolution images of willow plants, 3,000 pixels over a plant itself. But we weren't necessarily saying that was the right thing to do, so we actually degraded it. We took our 6 centimeter pixel resolution and degraded down to like 25 centimeters per side on a pixel. And it didn't help. For that, it was not productive. But in some cases, it may be unnecessary to have this real high resolution data. And this, same idea. This is a 10 meter DEM that you can download from the USGS. We can now make DEMs real effectively. Actually, our drones, when we're done with this lab on Thursday, will show you next time when we process imagery, you can take your millimeter resolution data and use photogrammetric engineering techniques that are built into the software of Pix4D, and the output of that is going to be a really high resolution image. In this case, this was one we developed for 1 to 2 meters, and now you can really easily the centimeter range. Any benefit for an elevation model? This is just looking at the surface of the landscape. Why would you want this over that, or do you need it? What kind of question? That's your landscape slope. Here's the top of the slope, down here is the bottom, down in the ravine. What are you going to be able to ask here that you might not ask here, based on that data? Ben?
It can be hard to detect things like cliffs on a 10 meter DEM.
Have you tried before?
Yeah, I've tried before.
You have, yeah, you have with your Eagle stuff probably.
Yeah, it's hard to do. It's easier just to classify yourself.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
altitude you can get that.
Interesting thought. So this right here, this is a pretty steep cliff right here, and these are little tiny areas where you have a steeper drop off, and it is not so steep here, and you just cannot capture that in this at all. You're going to miss that. So cliff surfaces, awesome. What else might you do?
Well, I guess it's kind of that, but like slope aspect is more easily identified in that one, because like you said, you can kind of see more variation, and like you're gonna get different vegetation and different slope aspects.
That was my thinking, and that's why we did this, because I wanted to see if that type of microtopography was going to affect vegetation growth. That's exactly why I did that. What I wanted to see was, can I detect a depression that over here you might be able to pick up that. The rest of this stuff is like it's a gradient, you can't really tell, but when you look at it, and I wish I had now had my drone over there, and I go back to the same site and do another one at the centimeter resolution, it'd be more interesting to see that very specific and detailed characteristic of the slope. So for me, it was all about hydrology. I want to know how water is going to move down the slope. I think I would never be able to pick this up over here. It's not going to tell me where water is going to accumulate, if it's going to hit depressions or little small ridges and move off down the slope. I was going to completely miss it. But with that, I can start to get this. And with our other data from our drones, it's even better. So here's MODIS 250 meter pixel resolution. For fire, that's great. If you're going to do watershed analysis, it's just that's not going to help you with MODIS. So we use, in this case, an aerial photograph. And what's the resolution of that photograph? Do you know? I don't know if you can see it. It's right there. So whenever if you work for the Forest Service or whatever someday, and they hand you a bunch of contacts, this information can tell you the date, where it was taken, the series number. So this was transit 1, it was photograph number 8, and 1 to 5,000 scale. So every inch on that image right there is 5,000. Is that coarse or fine resolution? It is way fine resolution. When you consider the general, the width of potential resolution, some images you'll get have got a 1 to 100,000 resolution. Everything's very coarse. You can't really see any detail at all in the landscape. You'd never be able to pick up this kind of detail at all. So we use this idea of, there's this word of small scale and large scale. In geography, they're used backwards. Small scale has a large extent, And usually a low resolution image is small scale. Large scale in geography is a small area and usually really high pixel resolution. So be careful when you're using those terms because you get mixed up all the time.
I probably have the least experience with this. So is MODIS just the type of picture that is that?
So MODIS is a sensor that's actually a satellite. So like Landsat is a satellite and sent up by the government. Landsat's been going for a long time. MODIS has still been around since the 90s, 2000s, and it's been going since. And it orbits sun synchronous with the sun behind it, and it's just taking images like this. If you have a fire, you can go and download MODIS, and you can pick out some of these attributes. And it's multi-spectral, so there's different bands of wavelengths of light that you can detect from those images.
And then when you were talking about the scale, like 1 to 5,000, what is it? I know we talked about this, but I just am confused. What is the units of measurement? The 5,000 what? Like 5,000?
Yeah, so in this case, let's say inches, right? If I took that image right there and I measured an inch, if I put 1 inch down right here,
Yeah.
then if I went out on the ground, if we went out there and got out a tape measure and started measuring, that area right there, we would pull the tape across this, it'd be 5,000 inches on the ground for that same area. So it's a way of comparing what you're looking at to what's in reality. Does that make sense?
But it could be whatever unit you want.
But it's whatever unit. So if you're working in centimeters, right, 1 centimeter here is going to be 5,000 centimeters on the ground.
Got it.
It's a totally awesome
That makes
thing.
more sense.
And going this way, how does that, any effects, this is kind of a remote sensing question, jumping the gun, but I just told you about, we could go down there and put a tape measure, we measure 1 inch here. How about this way? Any issues about going this way versus this way on that image? And this comes into play when you start doing, any kind of measurements with remote sense data. This can often play into this. So when I do a lot of the corrections, like when I was correcting these, we've got these things right here called fiducial points. These are little center tick marks. And so you can download, you can get, the people who took this are called Valley Air. They would give me a value for these points over here on the edges that I would use in the software I was using at the time, was ERDAS. And you can identify these locations on an XY grid. And then you use a camera correction. You develop a camera correction model where you include with this a digital elevation model, which is a change in elevation from the bottom of the ravine to the top. But my point is, if you draw a transit line from here to here, you've also got elevation down the slope and back up the slope. So it's a triangle, right? Straight across distance versus walking it downhill and back up, we're going to be a little bit off. So if you do that, if you don't correct for it, in this case using a camera correction model, then everything is off. I would put, because I put a whole bunch of white targets, and we're doing this on Thursday. We're going to go out in the field and put white targets down. If I put in like 30 or 40 targets in that area right there, all those had a GPS point. If I would just go in and just put my cursor, after I'd scanned this, turn into a digital image, I could put my cursor right on that point and click on it, and then type in the coordinates of that white target that I measured in the field. The whole point of that is to do what's called georectification, which you're going to do in 2 weeks. You're going to georectify the images you take next week. If I did not use a camera correction model, my error term was massive. It was between 40 and 80 of an RMS, and you're wanting to have it to be about 1 to 2, and I'm up in the 40 and 50. It's because I'm dealing with this topographic relief issue. It's not as a crow flies type of a measurement. And so when you use a DEM and a camera correction, it adjusts for that change in elevation, and when I was done with that process, I could get these down to 1, an RMS of 1.
Do you have to have that camera correction? I was thinking for like stuff I use is animal movement, and it would be pretty significant if you're going down a canyon and up versus like as a crow flies distance. Is there a way that you can calculate that? Because all we thought was on this location
Yeah, because you're just measuring, you're just doing a point here and a point there, seeing how far they're going. Does it make sense why it's actually further for them when they're going downhill?
They're going
You're seeing
down,
it,
exactly.
yeah, you've got a different perspective. It's a perspective issue. And
Google Earth has a tool that will calculate like, as the crow flies distance and ground distance as well.
We use measures.
so not,
Does it?
not everybody does this, because usually landscapes are not that steep, or it's not going to affect it that much, but if you want to be specifically detailed with this and really nail it down, then you really should investigate how much of an effect that it's having out there as far as your measurements go. And you can look into this, different programs, like I'm saying. A lot of the software has the ability to correct for those, you can adjust for them. And all you need to do is get an elevation model to account for. So if you worry about that, then consider that, let's talk about it. I can show you some approaches to dealing with this. And most of the time, if you're going to have pictures taken like these companies that do this, if you're going to do it by hand, like Valley Air, if you want to go there, I'll still take it. I've taken people to Valley Air, not Valley Air, to Air Graphics. It is a remote sensing office in Salt Lake City. Have any of you ever been there before? It's really tempting to take you so you can see what they're doing. These guys are like cutting edge remote sensing, and they're usually doing for cities, but we've used them for field research as well. They'll take you out. And they've got people sit in this dark room. It's 3 times the size of this room. There's all these cubicles set up, and people in there just, they have the mice, their mouses are insane. They're these great big things. They use both hands, and they sit there and work this little ball, these buttons around while they're adjusting, making these not tiles, but layers that are coming from LiDAR data, as well as aerial photographs they're taking from their aircraft. They just produce some really cool stuff. If you contract with them, they do all of this for you, so you don't have to think about it. When you're done, you get back a layer that's been adjusted and accounted for all these variables. If you're going to do it for yourself, you've got to look into it, because those adjustments, you've got to make them yourself. And the technology's there to correct for that, so at least consider that. So what we do instead is we use the terms fine and broad scale. That resolves the small and large issue, is to use those 2 words. Let's see if there's anything else there. Because they're arrayed in space in response to gradients of topography, temperature, moisture, and soils, and we often talk about these different concepts. That as these things change, you see your response, and you want to be able to quantify that. There's actual versus relative scale, there's hierarchy theory, there's a whole bunch of terminology and ideas that come out trying to account for these issues of scale in the work we do. And here's another, that's the same watershed I was just showing you. This is higher up. So you've got this portion there, it's on a south-facing slope, and with the right resolution, you can get there and look at these detailed responses if you got very high enough quality data. This is a paper that was produced some time ago, 2005. I really liked it a lot. This is Fuhlendorf, Sam Fuhlendorf, who's a faculty member at Oklahoma State University. And they've got lesser prairie chickens out there. So what he said was, well, if we've got a lek, the question is, how is that a lek affected by human impacts? And if you're going to quantify, in this case, prairie chickens, but if you're doing sage grouse work and you're wondering how successful your nests are, how would you quantify that? Just right now, if you were to walk out there, it's like, okay, I want to know, here is the sage grouse site. I want to know if that's a successful. If that nest site was successful, this one's not. I want to quantify the difference. What would you do to come up with that measure? This has been done a lot in the in the world of sage grouse. This has been done over and over again because we got to figure out some way of quantifying. His whole paper was to challenge our approach to evaluating habitat. So what would you do? Just some thoughts.
I think a lot of things that we've done is you like measure the vegetation and like how much like horizontal or vertical cover it provides. And you just like have this big table of all those different parameters and run models to see which one it looks like influences success or not.
Yeah, I could probably think of 20 to 30 papers that contain an approach like this. And how much area around that nest would you measure if you did a sage grouse? Or in this case, is a lek. Here's a successful lek. You know what a lek is? Do you all know what a lek is? Just in case. Sarah, do you know what a lek is? Somebody describe a lek. This is totally appropriate moment.
You should play a video of some like, that's pretty cool.
Do you want to see what a lek is? I think you do. Leks today are way cool. If you ever get a chance, you should go out. You should go out and do some trapping with anybody who's doing some sage grouse work. Go do this.
That one has a good sound behind it.
This one?
Yeah, that one's good. It's fun.
I'm not hearing feedback.
No. You need the music.
I know. What's going on with our volume?
Oh, it's not music.
Oh, it's good.
That thing's turned up. It's not that. This is a sage grouse. That's a great lek. So you've got a hen, you've got all these males out here, smaller hens right here. It's a common breeding ground where these males will all congregate and put on display and trying to attract these females. So then will come in and they will mate. The females will then leave and go establish a nest site somewhere else. Usually be underneath the sagebrush plant. Well, these birds right here are similar to that. They all come together at a lek. And going out afterwards, like for a sage grouse, if you find a successful nest, typical is a 10-meter transect out this way, 10-meter this way, 10 and 10. So from that transect, you're going to walk out and you're going to do cover using line intercept, or you're going to drop a pin and see what plants you're hitting and measure the total cover of sagebrush, herbaceous. You do that for nest after nest after nest. And this has been done 1,000 times by 1,000 people. And it's good measurement, right? Because then you know what they're using. But the question is that enough? That's some work we were doing, is trying to see if that really is enough to tell you the whole story. So what Sam, you got to meet Sam. I wish you could bring him in here and show you. This guy's cool as heck. But he said, well, how about we do concentric rings around, in this case, these leks for lesser prairie chickens. And so he said, well, we're going to measure what goes on in the habitat around a successful nest site and a not successful nest site at these different spatial scales. So this was his data. Here is, that looks really funny. It's like it's been doubled up. Here is cropland on this axis. Over here is the scale, dealing again with how far away you are out from the center of that lek. And what he found was, if you are thinking about declining versus sustained, that, and according to the data, if you're going out to 2,000 hectares of an area surrounding that lek area, it's showing the opposite of what's really going on, right? The more you get further out, then all of a sudden that you see this effect of the declining patterns that are showing up in areas where you do have crops taking over some of their habitat, right? Because otherwise you've got this tall grass prairie or short grass prairie where these birds are living. Well, over here, it's where there's crops, they are seeing a declining trend in the success of their leks for prairie chickens. And you would not have captured that over here. You would never have seen that. You would have said something false in your data. That's what we showed. It did the same with total tree cover, same story. There was no difference up close, but once you got out to 2,000 to 3,000 hectares outside of that area, it switched. And also the declining ones are way different than the sustained ones. You got to get far enough out to really find that effect. It's really showing. It's totally great paper. So we started doing that with sage-grouse just to see what we would find. And here are our rings. There's our sage-grouse nest. This is a bunch of habitat we mapped for the landscape around the leks and where they're nesting. And then we start to do the same analysis, see if we can figure out if we're finding that same pattern or trend. It's time. I got to let you go. If next week I'm going to be gone Thursday with David Birchfield, we're going to go to Nevada and up on Hamilton to go and sample and core trees for Great Basin bristlecone pine. So I'll be gone that day. If you want to come out and go and be a part of a research project, it's for a PhD study, and go out and help core trees and assess and evaluate high elevation sites in Hamilton, out in the middle by Ely, you could come. It's like going to Yellowstone. We're leaving next Wednesday afternoon and coming back Friday afternoon. So we're only going for a couple days. We're going to core a whole bunch of trees. So if you want to get some field work experience coring trees and doing dendrochronology, and Stan Kitchen, who's an awesome dendrochronologist, he'll be there. You are welcome to come. You decide if you got the time. On Thursday we'll still have class and lab, and
So is
like
that
normal
the same
labs.
place of our lab, right?
Not quite, not quite, because I still need you to learn how to georectify an image. And that's the day of taking our drone photography and georectifying it and starting image processing. And I've got to make sure you understand how to do that. So, unfortunately, no. But it'll be a kick in the pants. This area is beautiful. The mountains and range we're going on, these trees, spectacular. 2,000 to 3,000 year old bristlecone pine. You get to go hug one or two if you want. The location's in Hamilton, right in the middle of Nevada. Okay, please stay tuned at 11 o'clock. You know what's going down, so be ready to hear what the prophet says.